Hey everyone, and welcome back. So I want to talk about a topic today that I know is on everyone's mind, and that is test optional for 2021 and 2022. I know a lot of people are thinking and wondering, do I need to submit SAT? Do I need to submit ACT? Because almost every single school has gone test optional for the 2021 and the 2022 school year, right? So let's figure this out, right? I've got 6 tips and tricks that you can use so that you can go ahead and get into whatever school you're most excited about getting into. All right, so let's start out here with tip number 1. And this is the most important tip because it is going to give us context for all of our other tips. And that tip is to understand schools' motivations for going test optional in the first place, right? When schools are going test optional right now, they're saying we want to go test optional so that people have as equal an opportunity to apply to our school as possible. And that's true, right? Schools, colleges are great places. They want to create equity on their campus. However, there is also another reality that when schools go test optional, they very, very frequently are able to push up their ACT scores, push down their admissions rates, and boost their US News and World rankings. So let's look here at NYU for an example, right? For their freshman class that was accepted back in 2018, they decided to go test optional. If we see here, right, we can see the trend of their ACT scores before they went test optional. In other words, when they were test required. These scores are hanging out here, right, in the lower 30s. They're going up at a steady rate, but not a crazy fast rate. Now, when they made this change to go test optional, however, all of a sudden, the rate at which their ACT scores were increasing year over year increased by 150%. So they went from essentially going up by 0.2 every year to a full 0.5 every year. So what we can see here is in a test optional world, NYU's ACT score, their average ACT score was increasing almost a full point, actually exactly a full point every 2 years. What NYU can do is they go to US News and World Report and to the government and report their average ACT score as much higher. They say, look, our score is increasing. And then their school is recognized as being more competitive and they're able to push up their US News and World Review rankings, right? And likewise, they're able to push down their acceptance rate because all of a sudden, without test requirements, NYU looks a lot less scary to apply. They get vastly more applicants who they can subsequently deny, lowering their admissions rate and boosting their US News and World Review. So that's all a little bit, maybe potentially frustrating, but don't worry. It's not the end of the story here. That's just hack or tip number 1 that you have to understand to really get where we're going with all of these other things that we care about. So on to tip number 2. Let's see what this one is. So tip number 2 is to explain your circumstances, right? As I mentioned, schools do want to help you. They want to help you. That is their goal, and they want to create equity on their campus. So if you have a documented learning difference, financial hardship, or maybe a fundamental inability to go and access these tests, right? Like let's say you usually take ACT and SAT at your public school, but because of the COVID pandemic, you weren't able to take it. You want to go and tell those schools, hey, this is my reason that I couldn't take this test. This is my reason that I don't feel that this test demonstrates what I'm able to do. And if you go in and you explain that reason, schools will reflect much more favorably on that than if you went in and it seems like you clearly had lots of opportunity to take the test, but you just didn't feel like it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, schools care about these standardized tests because it is yet another indicator of your willingness to go ahead and work hard, right? To put in the time to study, to go take the tests, stay organized, all of that. And schools like that. If you're organized and you're hardworking, colleges will like that. Now, if you can say, hey, I'm organized and hardworking, I just couldn't take this test, or this test doesn't show who I am, that's great. Tell them that. You want to tell them that. So tip number 3 here is to analyze your score. So let's say you've taken a practice test, or maybe you've taken one ACT, or maybe you've taken one SAT. You need to analyze your score, see where your scores are, and see how they fall in the range, often called an interquartile range, right? The top 25th percent and the bottom 25th percent. See how your score falls in schools' ranges. If your score is falling solidly in the interquartile range, in that range, near the average of your dream school, you want to submit that score, right? If your score is right in the mix or even a little bit below the average student at your dream school and you've got a good reason to go there, submit that score. That's perfect. Now, if your score is considerably below that interquartile range, right? It's quite a bit below. That is where coming up with a good explanation, a good justification of why submitting tests are not a good representation of you is the perfect opportunity for you. And so tip number 4 is to think about finances. It is the reality that a lot of money, a lot of college scholarship is given directly because of ACT and SAT scores. Now, that's not to say in any way that you can't get college scholarships if you don't take the SAT or ACT. You absolutely can. However, there's a lot of money that you can get really easily if you just submit an ACT score at a certain mark, right? So think about where your ACT score is and do a little bit of research on scholarships. If you are at a 22 and you see that your state has a big chunk of money that becomes available to you as soon as you get a 21 or above, you probably want to submit that test score. You're going to get a bunch of money for it. Now, if money is not as much of your concern, that's not a problem, you don't really care about that, then maybe this isn't as much an issue and you don't want to worry about that. But again, standardized tests here are a big way that schools will allocate merit-based scholarships, right? The scholarships that you get for accomplishing some sort of academic task. So check that out. Maybe talk with your parents, talk with your family, talk with your guardians, talk and see where you guys are at and decide if maybe there are some scholarships for the ACT, for the SAT that you might need to or want to pursue. And moving on to tip number 5, it is super important if you decide not to submit a test score to analyze your grades. If you choose not to submit a test score, it's going to imply, right, that schools are going to need to look more at your high school GPA. So if you find yourself in a situation where your high school GPA is very high, but your test scores are very low, it might make a lot of sense not to submit test scores. However, if your test scores are pretty low and your high school GPA is even lower, you, by not submitting your test scores, are going to draw even more attention to your lower GPA. And it might be smart at that point to put in the time, not too much time, but to put in a good amount of effort to boost up those ACT or SAT scores so that schools can see, hey, wow, he's got some great academic accomplishments in these test scores. The GPA is a little weaker, but that's okay. We understand. It's a well-rounded student. We've got to look at all aspects. So that is really important. Analyze those grades. And if you want to see here, I actually made this little chart for you guys. So check out the chart here in the link below that outlines sort of an ACT GPA conversion system. Now, this is not a be-all, end-all chart, right? This is not, you shouldn't make all your decisions based off of this. If you have questions about your specific situation, just leave a comment, send us a message, something like that. Say, hey, Grantley, I have a 3.0 GPA and I got a 22 on the ACT. What do you think that means? This is where I'm at school. Just give us a bit of an idea. We'll give you, I'll either throw you back a response in the comments, or one of me or my team will email you back. We'll help you figure it out. And on to tip number 6, which is to consider what type of applicant you are and what kind of benefits you might have behind the scenes. So there have been a lot of stories about families, right, who donate a lot of money and thus have a good reputation with a school and therefore probably have a better chance of getting their student into the school. There have been stories of these families talking with the admissions department, and the admissions department actually saying, hey, we would recommend that maybe you don't submit your test scores because right now we'll probably accept you. Your family has been very generous. We'll probably accept you. And your scores are below our average, so they're just going to pull down the average. So let's just not submit them. So if you're in that situation, you might want to talk to the school, because if you don't need to prepare for the test, it's easier not to, right? Again, this is not a situation that a lot of students will find themselves in. But another similar version of this is if you are a recruited athlete and you've received a likely letter, right? You're likely to get accepted to this school, and your ACT or SAT scores don't fall within that traditional range of the school. You may again want to talk to the coach and talk to admissions and say, hey, how much do you actually need me to submit an ACT and SAT score? Again, we've worked with lots of athletes here who have received likely letters. They know where they're headed. Their scores are not in the range of the school, but the school says, it's fine. We've accepted you. We see you did a great job in high school. You have a good GPA. You're great at this sport. We're excited to have you as a member of our community. We don't really care that much about ACT and SAT for you. Just keep working on keeping your grades up and training so that you can come and represent our school in an athletic context super well. So again, if you're in either of these positions, right, you have a family connection or you are an athlete, and either of these situations, you may have received a likely letter from a school. If you've received that likely letter, it is a good time to open up a dialogue with that school and ask them. So everyone, those were our top 6 hacks, tips, and tricks for 2021 and 2022 test optional. Now, I've got a little bonus for you here at the end, one little thing that I want you to think about, and it is that we frequently here at our offices at Granite have students come in who are adult students who, for one reason or another, needed the ACT or the SAT to get a promotion. So my last little, we'll call it a mini tip, is that think about what sort of career you might be getting into. There are a decent amount of employers who will, as part of an application or as part of a promotion program, require you to submit an SAT and ACT score. And for many people, if they took it in high school, it's not a big deal. The cutoff is it's not super high. They say you just need to get this general score, and typically people have it and they just share it with their employer and they're good to get that promotion and keep moving. But if you happen to have never taken that test, you might not have it, and then you would have to come as an adult and prepare for that test, and you'd be coming and working with us here at Granite, which is pretty fun. I think you would like it, but you might save yourself a bit of a hassle by just getting it out of the way now so that you don't circle up as an adult and have to deal with it later. Now, again, it's important to just check. Think, here's some careers I'm interested in. I, know some firefighters, for instance, who needed to take the SAT for a promotion. If you're interested in a career, maybe in firefighting or something, look into that and see, maybe you need it, but maybe you don't. Maybe you're not going in that direction at all. Doesn't interest you, doesn't matter. Then you're fine. Don't worry about it. But I hope those tips are helpful. As always, if you have any questions, do leave them below, because I read those questions, I'll answer them myself. And if it's a big question that a lot of people are wondering about, or I think it makes a really good video, I'll go ahead and just make you a video and post it here so you'll know. And if you are preparing for the SAT and you need some help, join our ACT Everything course. It's linked below. I can't wait to potentially see you there. You can work with our tutors, or you can just do the on-demand version so you can learn at your own pace. All of that is available to you. But I can't wait to see all of you in our next video. Bye.